Tēnā koutou I tēnei ahi ahia meti mihi mai. Nā whānau hapu iwi o piki mai tēnā koutou. To our candidates, Rachel, Chris, Blair and Jace, tēnā koutou. Ko Graham Takaungawa, ko Manita e te wharanui o karakia o whakatū. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good evening and welcome everyone. I'm Graham O'Brien, the Dean of our cathedral. And it's a pleasure to host you tonight, to host our candidates, and to host you to come along and be informed as we look at the general election and the issues facing Nelson and facing our country. I was thinking one of the difficulties of hosting an event like this is wondering what on earth does one wear? Because of course one can't show leanings of different colours, can one? So hopefully a multicoloured check shirt passes the brief. Just a few health and safety things. If you did need the toilet, the public toilets are through the door you came in to the right and just the other side of this wall. If there was a fire, please exit by the door you came or the side exits if they're closer. And if there is an earthquake, just drop and hold because you are in the safest part of the cathedral. The format for tonight will be that each candidate has been given 10 minutes to speak on a range of topics, but maybe starting with something like the economy, something that is a key one for everyone. And then following that, we'll have a time of question and answer. Again, where we'll take questions from the floor, and each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to those questions. Just a reminder, because I've said to these four, this building echoes. So just to remind you, if you do ask a question, Joss, who you'll see running around, has a handheld microphone. Use it like you're eating an ice cream, nice and close, and talk slowly. And then everyone will be able to hear your question. If you talk fast in this building, it just goes into mush. And before we start, I thought a key value for tonight, which I'd like us all to express, was the value of manaakitanga, which is about showing respect, showing generosity, and showing care for others as we enter this time of political debate. So let us pray, and then I'll ask Rachel, followed by Chris, Blair and Jace to speak to us. So let us pray. Loving God, we thank you for our democracy and for Aotearoa New Zealand. We thank you for all those who are willing to serve our community and our country and government. Please guide our conversation tonight and give us wisdom as we make these important decisions. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Would you please put your hands together as we welcome all our candidates. I invite Rachel to kick us off.
E ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā iwi o te tauihu, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you to Dean Graham, the vestry, wardens and staff of Christchurch Cathedral Nelson for hosting us here tonight for this important discussion. Can I also acknowledge my friend and former boss, the Bishop of Nelson, Bishop Steve, who has joined us tonight. It's nice to see you, Bishop Steve. This place is a special place for me and for my husband Scott, as we met when we were young singers, when he was singing in the choir here at this cathedral, and I was singing in my church choir under the leadership of my mother, who is here tonight, and that is how we met. So this place holds very special memories for me over many years since I was around 16 years old. I want to begin tonight by referencing my maiden speech, which I gave to Parliament in early 2021, as it references a turning point in my life as a child in the 1990s. My mother, Jenny, is my hero. In the early 1990s, we were a sole parent family. Financially, it was a scary time. Mum made many sacrifices to give our family the opportunities that every Kiwi kid deserves, to learn, play, thrive, and participate fully in our communities. I don't know how she balanced the budget to ensure we all had music lessons or how she juggled 5 different sports games every Saturday, but she did it. I will always stand up for solo parents and ensure they have the financial and community support to raise their children and contribute to our society. Mum is here tonight, and again I wish to pay tribute to her for her sacrifices, but also for her commitment to social justice and to those who are less well off. At the time that we were a sole parent household, National delivered the mother of all budgets in 1991. It cut benefits, and we saw families plunged into poverty. This really was a defining moment for me as an 11-year-old girl, because I knew that if my mother wasn't able to work, we would have been one of those suffering families. A few weeks ago, I was gifted a banner from my colleague Jamie Strange, who is also a Nelsonian and a fellow Christian MP. The banner proudly displayed the Anglican Church logo. Jamie had been given the banner by former MP for Christchurch Central, Tim Barnett, who was given the banner when the 1998 Hikoi of Hope came to Parliament. The Hikoi was led by the Anglican Church and was a response to the poverty and inequality that was rising across New Zealand. Tim told me that he kept the banner in his office throughout his time as an MP to constantly remind him of the challenges laid down by our church, the Anglican Church. That time was when the 5th Labour government, led by Helen Clark, put in place a number of measures that lifted children and vulnerable people out of poverty, like the introduction of working for families, free early childhood education, paid parental leave, cheaper doctors' visits, the introduction of KiwiSaver, and interest-free student loans. So when Jamie passed this banner, a taonga, to me, I was very, very tempted to keep it. But I knew that after 25 years, the banner should be returned to its rightful place. So a couple of weeks ago, Scott and I were in Auckland and were able to return the banner to its home at St John's. It was a very special thing for us to do as Anglicans, but also for me as an MP, and it was an opportunity for me to reflect on the challenges laid down from the 1998 Hikoi of Hope, and to commit again to do all I can to ensure that our most vulnerable people are always supported properly by our government. There's a reason I've started my speech on the economy tonight by telling these stories, and that is because ultimately the role of the economy is to deliver for people. And in my view, the role of the economy is to deliver for our most vulnerable people, our children, our elderly, those who are sick and suffering. That does not mean that we should not be doing all we can to grow the economy, to create jobs and wealth for our nation, and to build the revenue we need to support the services, infrastructure, and all of the people who are part of our great nation. Far from it. As a former student of economics, I know that we need to grow our economy, but we need to do it in a way that supports and delivers for people. So now to some headline numbers. There is no doubt that it is a tough time for New Zealand and for countries across the world. The lasting effects of the COVID pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and the supply chain issues plaguing the globe are all factors that have led to high inflation in New Zealand, high interest rates, and tough times for many people. Despite the economic headwinds we are facing, our economy has strong foundations that mean we are well placed to face these difficult times as a nation. The economy is 6.7% larger than pre-COVID. Since the depths of the COVID recession, New Zealand's economy has grown by 10.2% compared to 8.8% for Australia, 7.6% for the US, 7.1% for the Euro area, and 6.1% for the UK, according to the IMF. Unemployment is below 4% and has been for 8 consecutive quarters. Strong government finances, net debt of 18.9% of GDP, which is below Australia, the US and the UK, according to the IMF. We have had 7 trade agreements signed or upgraded, and our free trade agreements now cover almost 3/4 of New Zealand's exports. Labour's economic priorities for the next term are to grow an export-led economy with a strong global reputation, to turn New Zealand into a centre of excellence for sustainable agriculture and agricultural technology, to be a global leader in renewable energy, to harness New Zealand's digital creativity and expertise, and to boost our premium tourism offering. These priorities will be underpinned by high-paying jobs, building infrastructure that lasts, better skills and practical education for better jobs, and a balanced fiscal plan. Today, Chris Hipkins and Grant Robertson released Labour's fiscal plan. Our fiscal plan will continue our focus on carefully managing the books while protecting critical public services like health and education, and investing to deliver high-wage jobs and a low-carbon economy. Our fiscal plan is responsible, balanced, costed, and credible. It has been endorsed by an independent analysis from Infometrics, who have concluded that the new spending commitments Labour has made can be accommodated within the future spending allowances set aside in the pre-election fiscal update. Our approach is underpinned by our fiscal goals to achieve an operating balance before gains and losses, which is called the Obergard, surplus across the forecast period, and to keep net debt below 30% of GDP. We're on track to meet these rules. Obergard is forecast to reach a surplus of $2.1 billion in 2026-27. Net debt will peak at 22.8% of GDP in 24-25 and then declines over the forecast period, well below the ceiling we have of 30% of GDP. We're starting to turn the corner and our economic fundamentals are strong. But I am clear that as we recover, we need to ensure that all New Zealanders share in our economic recovery. We can't just rely on trickle down. We must put our focus in equal part on economic growth and on providing opportunities for all New Zealanders. That's why Labour will continue to push for a living wage for workers, for support, not cuts, for those who are vulnerable, and continue our work to introduce fair pay agreements that will support people like our essential supermarket workers to have decent incomes. And I want to give a shout out to Cathedral parishioner Jenny Wells for her work in that campaign to lift wages for supermarket workers. I want to finish by correcting some myths that are often circulating in the community about beneficiaries. There is a myth that people on benefits like JobSeeker are lazy, don't want to work, or refuse to work. It's a myth. As the local MP and in my time prior as an advocate, I have met and supported many beneficiaries. Their stories can be harrowing. Many of them are women. Many of them have significant health issues that prevent them from being able to work. Some of them are survivors of family violence. Some of them are people who have faced terrible treatment at the hands of the state and shamefully at the hands of churches, including our Anglican Church. Male survivors of abuse and care who now have challenges with mental health, drugs and alcohol. Our job is to support them, not sanction them. As a Member of Parliament, as a leader in this community and as a Christian, my commitment to our most vulnerable people is that I won't be a part of a society that punches down when times are tough. As I said in my maiden speech, I hope as your MP that I can continue to fulfil the requirements of Micah 6 verse 8, to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Chris Bailey.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the invite to meet everyone at the cathedral here, and for everyone coming out on a night where there's probably I wouldn't say more exciting or interesting debate going on the TV, but I'm sure people who are interested will have it recorded like I have and go home and watch it. Like Rachel, the cathedral does have a big interest, part of my heart as well. While mainly for funerals and weddings, I remember as a 10-year-old I played the trumpet and playing up in the stand up there fanfares one Sunday evening. So it goes back a long way, and I've always thought what a magnificent place it is. I grew up in Nelson. Just a little bit about me. I grew up in Nelson. Went to Nelson Boys and Nathan College, and I left and went to university. Came out with a teaching degree, a Bachelor of Arts, a full Bachelor of Arts, and went teaching. Taught for 9 years. Went overseas. Came back. I thought I'd try something different, so I joined the police, and I was a police officer for 14 years. At the end of 14 years, 2010, I bought a business, which I employed quite a few people, up to 30 people, and went back. I was a silent partner, so I went back school teaching at the time, and I was at Nathan College teaching in the special needs unit at Nathan College. I was a special needs coordinator at Nathan College. And it was in 2019 when I was looking at what was going on after 2 years of the Labor government, and just how things were just starting to go backwards. And in education, which was obviously I was teaching, I was looking at the state of education and where that was heading. I thought, no, that's not right. And I looked at the crime, what was going on, the direction crime was heading. And I thought, yeah, that's not good either. The direction is not the right direction. And also, it was getting harder and harder to run a business. And I was trying to do two things at the teach and run a business. And it was getting really difficult with things being put in place, demands by the government it made it really difficult to try and make a profit to be able to pay your staff. So I put my name in the hat for the ACT Party, and because I looked at what they were saying, and I agreed with a lot of it. Personal responsibility. People, when they should be responsible for their own actions. They should be allowed to use the money that they earn much more how they want to spend it, rather than give it to the government for the government to decide how to spend it. Lots of things like that, and I thought, right, that's where I'll head. And I was lucky enough to be selected, and I've spent the last 3 years looking at Rachel on the other side of the house in Parliament, which has been a fantastic experience, however very frustrating. Over the last few months, or last 6 months to a year, ACT have been travelling up and down the country, holding public meetings. This is the first one in a cathedral, but listening to people and just hearing what people are saying. And there have been three main areas that are frustrating and upsetting people at the moment that we were getting the feedback from. The first, and Rachel's quite right, the first is the biggie. It's the cost of living and the economy, and people are finding it really tough out there. Business owners are finding it really tough out there because even more and more red tape and restrictions, and it's making it so difficult to try and make a profit. But on top of that, business owners are being told more and more how to run their business, how much to pay, how much to the different regulations that come in, and it is extremely hard to run a business at the moment. So ACT have a number of ideas to just get things back on an even keel, so that businesses can start thriving, can start making money, can start being able to afford to pay staff more, better conditions, all of those things. Nothing will happen with pay or those other things if a business isn't succeeding, isn't thriving in the community. So it's a big focus on what the direction that ACT want to head. And a big part of that, and Rachel covered a lot of them, and she's the figures I learned as a policeman, statistics and figures, you can manipulate them to however you want. So I won't delve into that so much now. But the big thing at the moment is the debt that New Zealand faces. And we really need to get on top of that before anything's going to change. $6 billion a year just to pay the interest is a lot of money, and until the debt and the spending, the government spending, is under control, then we're going to struggle. We need to look at the second main focus on, from what we're hearing, is the crime. Crime around New Zealand has just gone crazy, and we are in a crime crisis. I said this a couple of weeks ago, and I was accused of it's just a made-up figure. The crime rate is just being made up by conservative right-wing governments. And that was just absolute nonsense, because I went and visited a dairy owner today in Milton Street who had her dairy ram raided. It was the second ram raid robbery in 2 years that she had gone through, and she was scared every day going to work. She was scared. And it just didn't happen. It didn't happen when I was growing up, and it shouldn't be happening now. And we really need to get on top of the crime crisis. 500% increase in ram raids. The violence offences have gone up 121%. Figures like that are just a result of, we believe, a lack of focus on the issues that everyday people face, and rather than treating criminals, if you treat them nice, they're going to be nice back. It doesn't work like that. I was a police officer, like I said, and it doesn't work like that. We need to treat criminals like criminals. However, they need to have the chance to rehabilitate and to be able to contribute to society. So ACT have a lot of good policies around that as well. The third, and I'll just touch on this briefly, but the third main concern that we have faced when at all the public meetings is the issue of co-governance, and it's an issue that people don't like talking about, and if you talk about it, it's you're suddenly labelled. But it's an issue that New Zealand is going to have to face. We do need a discussion about it. It does need to be agreed upon and sorted out before this beautiful country will be able to actually move ahead and succeed as a prosperous, happy nation or country that it should be. I'm going to leave it at that, because I'm sure there are a few questions later on, and I'll give everyone else a chance. But thanks very much for listening. Cheers.
Hi everyone, my name's Blair Cameron. I'm 32, I'm full of energy, and I'm ready to get things done for Nelson. Thank you all so much for coming along to tonight's debate. Cheers to Bishop Steve for being here as well. Thanks very much, Graham, for organising this. And thank you very much also for asking us to focus our speeches tonight on what is the number one issue this election, which is the economy and the cost of living. So we've had lots of different debates with the other candidates. Last night we had a debate on climate change. Tomorrow night we've got a debate on sustainable transport. But it really is good to have this debate focused on the economy and the cost of living, because if you ask anyone in Nelson, this is what they will tell you is the top issue for this election. And I know that because I've spent so much time over the last few months out in the community, talking with people every single day. For example, this morning I was outside Countdown, handing out flyers, talking to people. I've door knocked on more than 4,000 doors personally to talk to people. And I would say about 75 or 80% of people in Nelson say that's it. The cost of living, the economy, that's what we're concerned about at the moment. That's what we're looking for in the next government. Who's got the plan to deliver on the economy and the cost of living? So first of all, I did want to go through some of the facts on the economy because the Labour candidate listed a few different statistics there, and I don't know about you, but when I heard the picture she was painting there, it didn't quite gel with what I'm feeling and what other people I know are feeling on the ground. So at the moment, we have domestic inflation of about 6.6%. That's non-tradable inflation. That's the inflation we have control of here in New Zealand. That means that every week, grocery prices are increasing, petrol prices are increasing. If we look at Nelson, the average rent in Nelson has increased about $7,000 per year under this government. And every single day, I meet young families who've done everything right, who've worked hard, who've saved to get a deposit on a house, and now they've been slammed with a massive increase in their interest rate. For example, one family I met in Te Hunanui a couple of weeks ago. Mum was a midwife, dad was a police officer. Their interest rate went from 2.7% to over 7%. That was about $2,000 extra a month, $24,000 extra a year that they had to find. With young kids, childcare increasing, that's made it even harder for them. And with grocery prices, particularly fruit and vegetable prices, they're just getting further and further behind every week. So let's look at some big picture facts on the economy as well. The current account deficit. So this is how much we're importing versus how much we're exporting. It's the worst it's been in my entire lifetime. That means, as a country, we're living beyond our means, and it's not a sustainable situation to be in. That's why it is vitally important that we do everything we can to get our economy growing again. If we look at projected growth, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, where I used to work, and I'll get into a bit about my background and my economic credentials in a minute, they estimate that New Zealand's growth is going to be not just one of the worst in the developed world, but the worst in the developed world for the next couple of years. That is not a good situation to be in. Without economic growth, that means we're not going to have, we might not have the funds to invest more in our health system, invest more in our education system, and invest in the other public services we need. And we absolutely need to do that, because if we look at those different sectors, they're under huge pressure right now. Now, I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but we do need to talk about the government books as well. And this government has run deficit after deficit, putting us further and further behind and taking us further and further into debt. Just a couple of years ago, we were $5 billion in debt. Now, we're about $76 billion in debt, and we're on track to reach $100 billion of debt in the next couple of years. At that point, the cost of interest on that debt will be more than we're spending on our schools. That's the situation that economic mismanagement has led us into. This government has spent more than it budgeted every single year. And now today we have a fiscal plan from the government that's going to require them to finally, for the first time, meet their budgets. And I just think it lacks a lot of credibility. When you've got a government that hasn't stuck to a budget for 6 years, can we trust them to suddenly start doing it for the future? So, the National Party, we have a very sound economic fiscal plan that is going to be careful with our spending, rein in wasteful government spending, make sure that we're getting value for every taxpayer dollar that we're collecting and that we're spending on public services. And now, with this economic situation, more than ever, we need good economic managers in government. So now I want to talk a little bit about my background. So I grew up in a little town called Methven, down in rural Canterbury. I lived with my mum, who sat just a couple of queues behind Rachel's mum there. And she was a school teacher when I was growing up. My dad, he worked behind the bar at a working men's club. So I didn't come from a wealthy family or anything like that. And in fact, I was just a typical South Island kid. I went to the local primary school, I went to the local high school, played lots of sport, football, rugby and cricket. And I spent my weekends and my school holidays working on farms and in hospitality. When I was 16, my economics teacher completely changed my life, when she told me about a scholarship opportunity to go to United World Colleges. I applied for that, and I was selected to represent New Zealand at the United World College of Hong Kong. I did my last 2 years of schooling there, and then I was offered another scholarship to study at Brown University, an Ivy League university in the United States. There, I studied international relations focused on global politics and economics. I wrote my capstone paper in university on the very exciting topic of banking regulation and global trade during the global financial crisis. But I did some fun stuff at university too, like playing on the university rugby team. When I graduated, I moved to Princeton University, where I spent 3 years working for a centre called Innovations for Successful Societies. Our goal was to spread good ideas about how to make governments function better. Then, in 2017, I moved to the World Bank, where I worked for several different units, but particularly one called the Global Delivery Initiative, which was focused on improving delivery in governments around the world. And I also spent some time working for the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, the Asia Development Bank, and also a centre at Stanford University called the Leadership Academy for Development. I want you to know about that because that's my work experience, that's what I'm bringing to the table, and that's what the knowledge and skills that I'm going to bring to government should I get that opportunity. So National has this week released a 100-point plan to rebuild the economy. And I'm not going to be able to have time here to go into all 100 of those points, but I did want to just give you an outline of what they include. First of all, and most importantly, we're going to stop the wasteful spending. So everyone, I think, has seen examples of taxpayer dollars being spent where they shouldn't be, and at a level that we haven't seen before. And we are going to rein in that wasteful government spending. There are countless examples of it across government, from the $51 million that the government spent on a cycle bridge over Auckland Harbour that never eventuated, and others.
1 minute.
1 minute, all right, Graham, I'll wrap it up. So the other parts of our plan, tax relief. We know that the cost of living is really hurting people, like I talked to before. That family that I talked about with young kids, they're going to be getting tax relief of up to $250 back a fortnight. And we have a tax calculator on our website, national.org.nz, where you can go into your information and find out exactly how much better off you'll be under a national government. Third, we're going to cut red tape, for example, by repealing Labour's disastrous RMA reform. We're going to build infrastructure for growth, like the Hope Bypass, a 4-lane highway bypassing Richmond and Hope, that'll mean reduced freight times and help grow our local economy. We're also going to electrify New Zealand by doubling our production of renewable energy through solar and wind power. We're going to grow skills and we're going to attract talent. At the moment, we are losing 40,000 talented Kiwis overseas every year. We're going to be doing everything we can to keep those Kiwis in New Zealand and working for our economy. We're going to be training more nurses and doctors and bonding nurses to work in New Zealand after they graduate, and we're going to be instituting tech visas to attract that tech talent to Nelson.
Cool.
And then finally, we're going to be open to trade and investment so that we can grow our economy and address the cost of living. Thank you.
Yeah. Jace.
That's better for me. So as soon as I open my mouth, you can tell I'm from the States, and I hope you won't hold that against me. I'm actually from Hawaii, and I moved here 16 years ago and have been a very successful business person here. And you might wonder what would bring a person to move to Nelson from Hawaii, or to New Zealand from Hawaii for that matter. I had a great life in Hawaii, but I have found a very good set of reasons to be here, which I won't go into completely because I've only got 10 minutes to talk with you. But all these 16 years that I've been here and running my electric bike business and expanding that to be the leading electric bike business in New Zealand, I have been a transportation expert in that field. I helped on the committee to write the 30-year transportation plan for Auckland. I have spoken widely throughout New Zealand with my talk, Your Future is Electric, starting 12 years ago, and I spoke at any number of Probus clubs and Rotary clubs and Nelson Science Society and other science societies around New Zealand. And it is this work that most people know me by. But of course, that's not what I'm here tonight for. I'm here to... Thank you. Thank you. Is that better? So that's not why I'm here tonight. I'm going to hope to introduce you to the green policies and to convince you that party voting green is the best choice for the Nelson area. And you might think that I'm also going to try to convince you to vote for me, personally. But that is not the case, because we already have an excellent, experienced, dedicated candidate from the Nelson region who has been doing a bang-up job, and we need to return Rachel Boyack to Parliament. So I'm being honest. I know my other candidate aspirants up here, and they are not of the grade that Rachel is. It's important for other reasons that I'll get into in a point. Now, you know the Green Party. I'm sure you heard of some of the great accomplishments of the Green Party, the actual economic aspirations of the Green Party. We aspire to give every child the same advantages that the middle class has in New Zealand. No child should suffer from malnutrition, should suffer from a lack of opportunity, should be given basically every opportunity to develop themselves fully. And that is not the case at present. And I'll explain that why in a second. We believe that every Kiwi family deserves as a birthright to have a comfortable and affordable home. That's not the case at present. And I'll explain how we're going to do that in a bit. We believe that every impoverished Kiwi family should be brought up to a basic level of competency within the marketplace. That is not happening at present. And we believe that we can honor our obligations under the treaty, under our founding document, and we can do that to the benefit of all of us. We are a bicultural nation, and we are better for it. And finally, we know that we can do all of this while preserving the legacy of an environment, the great beauty and legacy of the ecology that we've grown up and enjoyed. But it's imperiled at this point, as you know. And that's something that I'm going to touch on another part of the speech here. So, how are we going to pay for that? Well, the IRD did a study last year which brought up some really important points. It showed that the top percentiles of the New Zealand population, the top earners, pay only about half the effective tax rate as middle income and low income people do. So if you're one of the top percentiles, you'll pay approximately 8.9% in taxes. And if you're a middle income earner, if you're a nurse making $70,000, you'll pay approximately 20%. So there is a great inequity within this. We have a situation which has grown out of bounds. We have 311 families who have ballooned their value so that they own 25% of everything there is to own in New Zealand. 311 families. We also have the bottom 50%, half of New Zealand's population, that own just 2% of New Zealand. This is an untenable situation. It leads to great strife. It leads to family violence. It leads to violence. It leads to crime even. And so when we address these issues, we have to see that they're quite interrelated. Nothing goes without a sort of a ripple effect out into the economy. So the burden of taxation actually arrives on the middle class because the very wealthiest among us actually have little loopholes that the IRD did identify, and the Greens have taken that and reworked it in a way that that National and ACT would never do, because they've been lavishly funded by the very individuals, corporations, and families that have benefited from this skewed tax system that they put in place, frankly speaking. National did. So, if you believe, as I do, that every child deserves a good start in life just as a heritage for being a New Zealander, then you are a progressive, and you should consider party voting Green as the proper response to that. If you believe, as I do, that pay equity for nurses and doctors and service workers and teachers is a very, very important thing to keep them from running over the ditch and getting better working conditions and higher wages. If you believe that, you are a progressive. And I would consider that you should consider voting for the progressive leader in New Zealand, which is the Green Party. If you believe, as I do, that if you need a dental procedure and you simply can't afford it, that you should not go without. That every New Zealander should have some avenue for getting the necessary dental procedures that they need. If you believe that, then you're progressive. And I would encourage you to consider that the progressive Greens agenda might be the very best thing that would fulfill your quota there. And if you believe that we need to honor the provisions of the treaty, that our commitment as a people to the provisions under that is a bedrock of our citizenry here, of our national identity, then that you are a progressive. And I think that you should consider the great Greens tradition of honoring that as the proper home for your party vote. And if you believe, as I do, that ensuring a stable climate, which is not happening right now, is the legacy that you want to leave your children, your grandchildren, and their children, then we absolutely need to consider this. And with my final minute, I just want to talk about the climate. We are in a critical time. This is a critical election in a critical decade. We do not have the luxury of putting this off down a few more decades or generations. This is the time we must act. That is why the Green policy is the time is now. Now, the other parties, the conservative parties, are trying to defund these types of activities and kick the can down the road. But if we do that, what we are doing is we're leaving a toxic legacy to our young people, and we cannot do that. We owe it to them, and arguably we owe it to ourselves because we are all together in this, to leave a better legacy for that. All of these things are connected in the cost of living, in the integrity of the environment, in crime and the causes of that. They're all connected. And I would like you to consider that the Green Party understands that connectivity better than any other party. Party voting Green, good idea. Otherwise, it's important we put Rachel Boyack back in office. Thank you.
Well, thanks again to our four candidates for giving us food for thought, and hopefully those thoughts have generated some questions for tonight. What I'd ask you to do is emphasise to ask a question rather than make a statement, and ask a question in a way that all 4 candidates will have 2 minutes each to answer that question. So if you would mind standing up, there's a gentleman back there. Joss has the microphone. Remember, it's an ice cream. We should be all good.
Good evening, everyone. I'm a Richmond resident. You'll be pleased to note I didn't turn up in my pyjamas today. Candidates, it's delightful to see you taking this whole candidate thing seriously, but I've got a couple of questions. I'll start out with the question on transport, which is linked to the cost of living. And my question is, how much does it cost to go from Richmond to Nelson on the bus? Any candidate can answer.
Problem is, once she's answered.
So the question is, how much does it cost to go from Nelson to Richmond on the bus? So if you don't have a B card, a full adult fare is $3. If you do have a B card, an adult fare is $2. If you're under 13, it's free. If you're under 25 years old, you'll get a concession. So it will be, it's already $1, and then for a lot of those people, it cuts down to 50 cents each way. And if you're travelling between 9 and 3, for our older people with a gold card, it's free. I hope I got that right.
Thank you, Rachel. That was probably not quite as much detail. There was one thing you missed out. My 10-year-old travels free. She's a freeloader, which I'm delighted to note. Next question, because I come from Richmond. Why is it going to take so long to get the Gladstone Road and Queen Street intersection sorted? Surely Waka Kotahi can do something a little bit faster than plan until 2027.
Thank you. We'll start with, change the order up. So we've got Chris, Blair, Jason, Rachel.
The main reason councils and Waka Kotahi they can't agree on stuff is because of funding. ACT has a policy, an infrastructure policy, where 15% or half of the GST for every new build house goes to the council, which will give the councils a lot more money to be able to get involved on those big infrastructure issues rather than kicking them down the road to the next council to worry about. And we also have a policy of 30-year loan schemes between the government and councils, which would also bring in more funding to enable the best people to decide on where highways go and all of those sorts of things are the people who live there, like the councils, not the government bureaucrats. So we need to fund councils properly, get them working properly with the government agencies and get things done.
Blair, did you want to comment?
Thanks for your question. Yes, so I am very stoked that we have got funding for the Hope Bypass locked away and loaded if National gets into government. When I was first selected as a National candidate, I said that getting that transport mess in Richmond sorted was absolutely my top priority. I took Christopher Luxon there, I took Nicola Willis there, and then they sent our Transport Minister, Simeon Brown, down to also go there. And then I advocated really strongly for the Hope Bypass to get included in the next National Government's Roads of National Significance programme. Of course, there was a lot of competition between other candidates and MPs from around the country to get it included. So I'm really glad that it is included in that programme. As far as the time frame, just to clarify for everyone not from Richmond that might not be aware of this, the Hope Bypass will be a 4-lane highway bypassing Richmond and Hope with a flyover at Lower Queen Street to separate the traffic from the new subdivisions like Berryfields from the state highway traffic. It's going to mean we get freight going through that intersection, separated from the rest of the traffic, moving a lot faster. It's going to be great for the local economy, and it's absolutely essential for the future of our region. The reason that the time frame on it is as long as it is because I'm going to be an MP that delivers on promises. I want to make sure that we get it done and we do it well and on time. So I'm not going to commit to getting it done immediately, because I want to make sure that we deliver it on time and as budgeted as promised. You know, I'm sure people will have been aware of another infrastructure project that was promised that construction would start this year under this government, that's now been delayed until 2026. So I'm very committed to making sure that we deliver that project on time and on budget. And $250 million is what the current estimate is from Waka Kotahi to build that. That's signed off in our plan, that's ready to go, and it's fully funded under National's Transport for the Future plan. And I would note that although Labor has since changed their mind and have said that they will do the Hope bypass as well, they're yet to commit any funding to it.
Thank you, Blair. Jace?
Well, I'm glad I mentioned that I was one of the definers and the contributors to the Auckland 30-year transportation plan. It took us a year and a half with a bunch of academics, engineers, heads of the transportation industry that made that plan. And we came up with some very interesting conclusions once we had studied the history of Dallas, Copenhagen, Portland, Oregon, Amsterdam, Washington, D.C., New York City, and that is that continuing traffic abatement had never, ever been delivered by simply expanding the corridors of options into a city. Because in a few years, once that corridor is established, the sprawl out from it will always, and this is not like maybe sometimes you can play, it will always overwhelm any corridor you build. This is what's happened. It's become very evident, and that is why many of the greatest cities in the world have had to turn away from the model of just expanding their arteries. I know it seems like such an obvious thing, just build more roads, and it's actually the wrong move. Unfortunately, it is the wrong move. The right move is that you have to have a mix of intermodal transport. You have to do a variety of planning and infrastructure improvements which allow people to move about a city and an area in a variety of ways, and so that the buildup of choke points doesn't happen. New Zealand Transport Authority did a study just the other year on the choke points in the Nelson region, and what they found is that if you had reduced the traffic volume by 10%, you would have alleviated the backing up of traffic. And this is why Rachel's electric buses are so brilliant. All we have to do is reduce traffic by 10%, and we will alleviate these things. And we don't do that by building more roads. It won't happen anytime soon, and it won't actually have a lasting effect. It's unfortunate. That is the actual science behind it.
Thank you, Jace. Rachel.
Thank you. I do just want to correct something, because I do pride myself on my integrity, and especially when I'm standing in this place. And that is around the hospital timeframes. And what we have committed to is starting the project. And the project has been started. There is a huge amount of enabling works that has to occur, which is going to take a couple of years. We have to clear the car park, we have to build the pipes, we have to do all of that consenting work that is part of the new hospital build. And I'm really proud that we managed to get $1.1 billion for that. We did have to have a delay, and I have expressed my frustration around Health New Zealand not sharing all of those reasons with the community when they should have. And part of that was to ensure Treasury took a deeper analysis of the project so that we didn't cut corners. Otherwise, we would have ended up with a smaller hospital and not enough beds and less money. So we've taken the time to do it right. On the Hope bypass, The challenge we face here actually is something I've been working on during my time as an MP, is around the fact that our two councils don't always work so well together on transport plans. And something I actually agree with Chris on is that we've had real challenges between Nelson and Tasman, each pitching for different projects. The Hope Bypass, though, hadn't made its way into either the National Land Transport Plan or Tasman District Council's plan. And so in 2020, I took some of my colleagues to visit the site with the developer and the mayor, and we discovered there actually wasn't a plan sitting there, whereas a lot of Nelson's transport projects have been sitting inside a plan. And so over the last couple of years, we've done the Richmond business case, which has been signed off by Waka Kotahi and signed off by Tasman District Council. The concern I've had is that they said if the bypass was needed, and they said it was going to be needed quite a few years out. So I just want to correct that. I haven't changed my mind on this. As the local MP and as a candidate, I've been saying that issue in Richmond is actually the biggest issue we're facing around transport. One of the things we've done is we've changed the law so that if you're doing a big housing development like Berryfields, you have to do the transport plan at the same time, because the council and the previous government didn't do that. So we can't have that happen again. So we've got the Hope Bypass into the government policy statement. Only government can commit funding, and over the next 3 years we'll be doing all of the design and consenting work, and then we'll be getting on and building this important road for our region.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. Do you have another question? Got one up the front here?
Thank you, Jocelyn. Thank you. Greetings to everybody, and thank you for being in your profession. There's many of us that could never handle what these people handle, yeah? And hats off to all of you. I work in the education sector, been involved working in the education sector for 48 years, and come quite a long journey. And then I'm interested because the focus is on the economy and the cost of living and everything else. However, we all know that the baseline is the care of our children, which is also tied in with the education of our children. And unfortunately, in this election so far, in debates so far, there has been very little spoken about the direction that each of the parties would take. So maybe not as individuals, if you could give just a really short outline of what each of the parties intends to do in that area. And as a Kiwi, the tendency is that each time a government gets in, they roll aside everything that's been done and they reinvent the wheel. So I kind of hope not to hear that the wheel's going to be reinvented, but that taken into account is all the work that's been done over generations and generations of educators in this country. And at one stage our country was up number 7 in the world in science and number 4 in the world for mathematics and literacy, and I'm not sure where we are now, but I believe it's reflected in what we see happening as people coming from New Zealand, through New Zealand and out into the world. Can you speak to that, please?
Thank you. So we have Blair, Jace, Rachel, Chris. I'm trying to rotate who gets first.
Hey, thanks for the question. And education is so important and so closely linked with the economy anyway, because when we're talking about our future economy, we're talking about how well our kids are educated now, so that they can take on those jobs and innovate in the future. So, as I said before, my mum was a school teacher, so I got a wee bit of an inside view for them when I was growing up. But what I hear from teachers when I talk to them, and I visited Hampton Street Primary School last week and talked to a lot of the teachers there, is that teachers are under a huge amount of pressure right now. There are far more issues that they're dealing with in the classroom than there used to be, and there hasn't been that increase in support and resources to deal with that. And so our policy is really designed around giving teachers the support that they need in order to be able to cope with those new pressures and to keep delivering really high quality education. What we've seen in the education sector, in that there's been a bit of an explosion in new jobs at the Ministry of Education, and a lot of that new spending at that top level isn't translating into results on the ground. And we know that actually spending on the front lines in schools with teachers that's what's going to have the most impact on our kids. There is one part of our education plan that I did want to touch on briefly, and that's one thing that I'm really concerned about is literacy levels. So kids arriving at high school and not having the reading and writing ability to be able to then do further subjects. I learned to read using phonics, which is when you learn how letters and combinations of letters sound, and then you sound out the word as you learn to read. Actually, a lot of kids have been learning to read these last few years using a different type of reading, where you look at the first letter, you look at the pictures, you look at other context, and then you guess what the word is. And now there's mounting evidence that this type of way of reading doesn't work for so many kids, and we've really lost a lot of kids because we haven't been teaching them to read the right way. So our policy is going to go right back to phonics, and we've got a $60 million plan to roll out around schools to make sure that every kid learns to read before they get to high school.
Cool, thank you, Blair. James.
When we're talking about quality education, aren't we talking about funding in great part? We underpay our teachers, and then we are surprised when they exit the field or they go overseas. Their stress is enormous. Why can't we fund our teachers more? Well, if you look to the conservative parties, they're going to tell you we just simply can't afford this. But the fact of the matter is, yes, we really can. We are a very wealthy nation, but the very most wealthy people in our nation actually do not pay an equitable share of that tax. I mean, for instance, all the services that go into our education are unfairly held on the lower and middle classes. Christopher Luxon is a very good point. Christopher Luxon is a very wealthy property owner. If he were to sell his properties today, he would net in capital gains something just under $2 million on that gain. And what would he be obligated to pay back into the coffers of the schools and the fire departments and the health services? What would Christopher Luxon pay on his profit? Zero. He would pay nothing. And we are the only country in the OECD that does not have some form of a capital gains or a wealth tax. And this is what's driving us not having substandard medical care, not being able to afford the kind of educational opportunities that are the birthright of every Kiwi child. And the conservative parties are actually fronting for that kind of inequality, and they're being very well funded while doing it. That's the key. And the Green Party has made a tax policy umbrella that completely envelops an equitable tax system, and it would provide the kind of quality education for every Kiwi child that they deserve by birthright.
Thank you, James. Rachel.
Thank you. It's such an important question. As the local MP, I've made a point of visiting every school in this district, some of them multiple times, and I do agree that teachers are doing it really tough right now. One of the things the Labour government has been really committed to is lifting teacher pay. It's fundamental, and so we've done a lot of work to lift teacher pay across all sectors over the last 6 years that we've been in government. I do just want to make a couple of comments around what Blair's been talking about in terms of structured literacy. I saw my mother's face in the front row. Sorry to point out you are, Jen, but Mum has a PhD in education and is a reading recovery specialist. And one of the things I've been talking to teachers and others about structured literacy, just getting their views, and I door-knocked a woman recently in Nelson who's a reading recovery specialist, and she raised her concerns with me about a sole focus on structured literacy. Actually, what the evidence shows is that different children learn using different methods. One of the things we've said in our policy is we want consistency of teaching. We need to trust our teachers to teach the way that that child will learn. Ireland introduced structured literacy as a requirement, and their literacy levels dropped. So for some children, particularly children with dyslexia, structured literacy is brilliant, and we should be using it, right? For some children, it's not. And so that's the critical thing. We are seeing more schools bring it back, which I actually think is a good thing. But we need to take some real care that we allow our teachers to teach the children using the method that best is used for the child. The other thing is we're going to be continuing our work in areas like early childhood and education, and so one of our policies is for 20 hours free for 2-year-olds in early childhood education. And another concern I have is I was given a letter recently from national spokesperson to a local teacher who said they wanted to take away the ratios that we've had for qualified teachers and reduce those ratio work that we've done. So that's where we make sure we have a good ratio of trained teachers. Most critical thing is to get kids back to school. And so one of the things I'm really pleased about is we've seen a 10% increase in attendance over the last few months as we get kids back post-COVID, and some of the work we're doing around lifting attendance. The most critical thing is that we actually have them in the classroom. Kia ora.
Good. Thank you, Rachel. Chris?
There's so much to cover in 2 minutes, but just really quickly, and like I said in my introduction, that's the reason. One of the reasons I'm here is because the declining standards of education were evident a few years ago, and they've just got worse now. The literacy and numeracy rates are just plummeting, and we really need to address it. Rachel hit it at just at the end there. Truancy, 60% not attending school regularly. I mean, that's an abysmal rate. So we really need to get on top of that. Just ingrain in parents again after COVID. We can accept a little bit about COVID, that's how important education is. And you're dead right. It has been mentioned a lot in the meetings that I've had. Blair related education to the economy. I also relate it to crime. And I think you'll know that most young offenders will have been truants or are currently truants. So we really need to get on top of that. And running out of time, I just need to address the constant money tree that the Green member mentions all the time, and the constant reference to attacking people who have succeeded in life. And that is not my idea of educating and education for our kids. I believe that our kids should strive to be Mr. Luxon, own houses, or to be wealthy, or to do well and succeed in life through their own efforts and through doing their homework, through going to attending school, through doing all those good things that might make them successful, not to have a political party come along and say, you don't deserve it. Someone else deserves some of what you've earned and what you've worked for. I think that is probably at the moment the most dangerous philosophy that we are instilling by listening to that sort of stuff, by instilling into our kids the idea that success, there is something wrong with success, and we need to stop that really quickly. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there another question? Oh, yes, we've got a gentleman in the green just here.
Hi everyone. So New Zealand has one of the highest rates of inequality in the OECD. So what's your plan to reduce the gap, the wealth gap in New Zealand?
Thank you. So reducing the wealth gap, we have Jace, Rachel, Chris and Blair.
Thank you for that question. It's kind of a softball question for me, of course, because I just outlined how we do that. We are the only country that does not actually have a equitable tax right through the upper income levels, and that is what's starving us in New Zealand from all the programs that we need, the social services that we require, and the environmental integrity that we need to be able to hand our children. So the Green Party has devised a wealth tax that would accrue to anybody who a couple that owned more than $4 million would actually pay a 2.5% tax on the amount that they owned in excess of that $4 million. And this would go a long way to alleviate some of the land banking issues, some of the very large landowners that can shield any income they have until they sell their property, and then they pay no capital gains tax. So we actually have a problem in policy. It was initiated by the National Party back in the 90s, and it has been like a zombie it has maintained itself, and we can't seem to bring ourselves to actually make an equitable tax like every other nation in the OECD. We're the outlier, and we're suffering for it. Let's get ourselves together on this and finally address an equitable tax system, and you'll find that a lot of the other problems of New Zealand melt away.
Thank you. Rachel.
So I'm sure many of you know that prior to entering Parliament, one of my previous roles was working as a union organiser. And I worked really hard locally to lift the wages and incomes of many, many people in Nelson. Nelson is known for sunshine wages, and unfortunately we have some industries, but we also have some areas where people are paid less for doing work here in Nelson, where they'd be paid more in other parts of New Zealand. One of Labour's policies that we've introduced is our policy around fair pay agreements. When we deregulated our employment framework in the 1990s, we took away the ability to have sector-based agreements. And so the area that I've had first-hand experience of locally is in supermarkets. We have a duopoly with 2 supermarket chains in New Zealand, and I do want to acknowledge again the cathedral parishioner, Jenny Wells, who's led the charge on this locally. One of our supermarket chains pays a decent wage because there is a collective agreement in place. The other one doesn't. And at the moment, right now, going through its work is a fair pay agreement for retail workers that would ensure no matter which supermarket you worked in New Zealand, no matter which brand you worked for, you would get a decent wage. It's the most important thing we can do, especially when we have a cost of living crisis, is to ensure that people are earning enough money so that when times get tough, they have enough there to cope with that situation. And so it's unfortunately one of the policies that National and Act both plan to cut. It means that any fair pay agreements that are currently working through their system, where we're going to get fair pay for supermarket workers who are essential, for some of our bus drivers, for cleaners, for security guards, people who kept this country going during COVID. The opportunity for those people to get a decent wage and income through our fair pay agreement process will be gone. And in my view, it's one of the most important policies that is at risk this election, and it's why I'm asking you to give your 2 votes to Labour so that we can ensure we have a decent way to lift wages and incomes for all New Zealanders. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Chris.
Yeah, look, it's a good question, and again, we are just philosophically opposed to the way Labour and the Greens think. We don't think that to fix everything you should take it off someone who has it and distribute it properly, then all the problems will be solved. We believe if we create the conditions, the working conditions for businesses to succeed, for people to be able to negotiate with their employer, working conditions and pay and all of those sorts of things, if the business is making a profit, I know it does flow down, but you'll hear lots of rhetoric that it doesn't, and that just the greedy business owners keep it all. But with good working conditions, businesses that make a profit, like the supermarkets who are suddenly they're getting challenged for making excess profits, whatever that means, and they're paying their supermarkets well. That's the countdown one that Rachel's just mentioning. One minute they're great employers because they're paying the living wage, and then they're terrible because they're making excess profits. So you can't have it both ways. The other thing getting the equity is education. It comes back to education, and everyone should have that ability to learn, to progress as far as they can, and ACT's one of its main policies in the past, 2014, introducing charter schools, which did just that. It was great hearing Rachel talk before about trusting principals, the way they teach. Everyone should do it the way they want to do it. It was almost as if she was advocating for charter schools. But when Labour came in 2017, the first thing they did was get rid of them, opened in the next day as special character schools. The only difference was there wasn't any accountability for that ex-charter school on attendance, and they had to employ union labour. So, yeah, that's the way we'd do it, rather than take it off people who have succeeded. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Blair.
Okay, so the question is on reducing inequality, and we've heard two of the parties talk about how the way to solve it is through taxing. And we're not going to tax our way through solving this problem. The way that we reduce inequality is by giving people opportunities, making sure that everyone gets those opportunities, and through growing our economy so that there are more opportunities. If you talk to some of the really innovative, exciting businesses in Nelson and Tasman, we want to be supporting those businesses to grow, because that's going to be more high-wage jobs for local people in our community. One way we're going to do that, for example, is at Snap IT, one of the most exciting, innovative businesses in Nelson, last week. We are going to be introducing a new visa that's going to allow people and tech entrepreneurs to be coming to New Zealand and innovating here and setting up businesses here and creating those high-income jobs for the future that we want to see people have the opportunity to have. For me, like I said before, I didn't grow up in a wealthy household. I grew up in a very, very humble household. And what opened up those opportunities for me to earn a really good income was education. And that's why I really liked your question before, because one of the absolute keys for us to be able to create opportunities for people, give them the opportunity to succeed, is through education. That's why it's so devastating at the moment that we do have those record high truancy rates, and our education statistics comparative to other countries are dropping. If you look at our PISA score results, so that's how we measure ourselves against other countries, kids are doing a lot worse in maths, a lot less in reading, writing and science than they have in our history. And we really need to turn that around if we do want to give kids opportunities and give them the opportunity to succeed. The last thing I want to talk about briefly, if Graham will let me have time, is social investment. So our Deputy Leader, Nicola Willis, is leading our work in that, and this is all about investing in the most vulnerable kids in New Zealand, the kids that are most likely to enter the justice system, the most likely to come from, have not so good family environments, the kids that are most likely to be truant, and investing in them from a really early age so that they can have the same opportunities that I have had and that other people have too. Thanks.
Thank you, Blair. Have a gentleman here.
Hello.
We'll get next on, Richard.
My name's Steve Holyoake. Government debt is $14,000 per Kiwi, about. Who do we owe it to? How do your party propose to repay it? And when? Oh, and why? Who, why, how, and when? $14,000.
Thank you. Back to Rachel to kick us off.
Thank you, Steve. As I mentioned in my opening statement, we do have a plan to pay down our debt. I'd just like to remind everyone of why we ended up with that debt in the first place. And that was because we needed to invest significantly through COVID. The bulk of that debt came through payments like the wage subsidy and payments to programs like Jobs for Nature to ensure that we had people connected into employment. So we've been very honest with New Zealand at the time and since then that through COVID, in order to keep people connected to employment, we had to take on government debt. What I would also say is that our government debt relative to other countries in the OECD is one of the lowest. And so while it is still far too high than what we want, it is one of the lowest globally. One of the ways that we have to work through the next few years in order to pay it off is to be really careful with our fiscal spending, which is one of the reasons why we have sought to limit some of our spending in the last few months, but also going forward, why we're going to take real care around our operating allowance. It's one of the reasons why we don't support tax cuts, because we actually need to ensure we have enough revenue to pay for health and education. And so, yes, we have high government debt compared to where we were as a country. But I do just want to reinforce that without that government debt, we would have had significantly high unemployment during COVID. We would have had people out of jobs, and that would have been a much greater challenge for our country to face, having thousands and thousands more people out of work during and after COVID. So we will get there, we will work to pay it off, we will need to take real care as a government and as a country over the next few years. But I do just want to reassure everybody that there is a plan to do that. It is going to work. We're going to get it back to a level that we want it to be at. And without having taken on that debt, we would be in a far worse situation today.
Hang on a minute.
Who do we owe that money to? Who do we owe the money to?
Oh, right.
The technical question, who do we owe the money to?
Can you answer that in 1 second? Just 1 second, who we owe it to, and then Chris.
Okay, so the way government debt works is that it works through institutions like the IMF, but to other countries. And so this is fundamentally how we take on debt as a country, is that we take it through organisations like the IMF, we take it from other countries, and essentially how the global economy works is that there is a lot of this debt circulating between countries. So that's how it works.
Cool.
Hopefully
Thank
I
you.
was given 1 second.
We'll keep going, Chris. I'm sure Chris can keep adding to it. So.
Well, glad Rachel had answered that actually. I just want to clarify just the wage subsidy and the small business loans that Grant Robertson talks about so often, about how he looked after business was looked after with the wage subsidy and the small business loan. The wage subsidy was paid to the employee. The employee wasn't actually working during that time, so in effect they were on the benefit. It wasn't money that was going to the business owner who got rich from it. In effect, the business owner was the distributor of the benefit of the wage subsidy. And to say that it's the majority of the debt, I don't think is quite accurate. The other thing, the small business loans, they were loans. All businesses have to pay them back. That wasn't something that was given to businesses. The businesses have to pay it back. So I think it's the way it gets talked about is if businesses were just handed all this money. It wasn't like that at all. As far as cutting back on wasteful spending, that's ACT's main focus. It was mentioned before, Ministry of Education. In the last 5 years, they've gone from 2,500 staff members to over 4,000. That's 1,400, over 1,400 increase. There's millions and millions of dollars of saving in every department. There are government departments that literally do nothing and are getting dished out tens of millions of dollars. They will have to justify what they do and the cost-benefit analysis of the money that they receive. So there are lots of ways that we can save money.
Cool. Thank you, Chris. Blair. Ots? Yes, no, it's Blair next. Yeah. And then Jason.
Look, this is a huge issue, and I know that the Labour candidate tried to sort of pull the wool over your eyes on the debt issue there, but it's a fact that we are in really high amounts of debt to our international creditors. As I said before, we were only $5 billion in debt, and now we're on track to hit over $100 billion in debt. That has to be paid back for us to keep our international standing in the world, to keep our ratings, the international ratings agencies happy, so that we can get more debt in the future for future investments that we need. As I mentioned before, we will be paying more interest on that debt in 2025 than we spend in our schools. That's the result of economic mismanagement. That is the result of out-of-control government spending, and we have seen countless examples of that from this government, from things like the $45,000 leaving party when the head of one ministry left to a different ministry, from the $1 billion budget blowout of Three Waters, which still hasn't delivered better water infrastructure in New Zealand, despite so much money being spent on it. And it's going to be us paying that money back in the future, if only we had something to show for it. If only we had good infrastructure built with that money. If only we had a stronger education system built from that money. If only we had a new hospital, better health services. But most of that money has gone to waste. Yet we still have that debt to pay back. That is why we need strong, sound, responsible economic managers in government, so that we can rein in the wasteful spending and ensure that every tax dollar is going to something that is actually making a difference to people, that is actually benefiting people, like infrastructure, like healthcare, like education.
Thank you. Jace.
So one of the unenviable situations when you are in the head of a government is that you have to make decisions about when your nation will have to borrow money to do something very considerable, like respond to the COVID crisis. I give Labour a lot of slack for the deficits that were run up during the COVID epidemic, and I would have to say that I am so appreciative of Jacinda Ardern and her cabinet for how they handled the COVID situation in New Zealand. I believe we're #1 in the world with having protected ourselves from thousands of unnecessary deaths. And yes, it cost us some money. How much do you value your parents and your own lives? And that did put us into a deficit, but that's what governments have to do. The grown-ups in the room sometimes have to make very tough funding decisions, and sometimes that incurs borrowing. And you'll find that that's exactly what every government ultimately has to do to exist. So I'm not going to go over what Rachel said. I think it was excellent what she said. It's why we should return Rachel into her parliamentary role. She's on top of it. She was part of a very valiant effort to protect us during our great time of need. And she has the vision and the gumption, the experience to do that once again.
Richard, in the blue, on your right, halfway down the back, Joss. It's just before 8:30, so this will probably be our last question.
My name's Richard. I'm a resident of Nelson. So we all know that high petrol prices is one of the drivers of inflation and high cost of living. So I've lived in different countries around the world, and I know that this all has to be a balance. You can have electrification, but electric cars and trucks are expensive for a lot of New Zealanders, and then you've got to have the network to support that. So I'm wondering about if you could talk about transportation policy a little bit more. For example, is there any thought about developing New Zealand's offshore oil and gas, reserves anymore, pulling them out of the earth? And is there any thought about reopening the mothballed Marsden Point refinery to perhaps deal with some of the issues of the high petrol prices? Thank you.
So it's a question around transport, but linked into energy supply. And we'll start with Chris, Blair, Jace, Rachel.
One of Act's policies is to immediately reinstate the offshore search for oil and gas. We don't think that was helpful in the whole transition period that we're currently going through between the oil and petrol and gas that we need through to the electricity. So that's probably a big one as far as that side of it goes. Marsden Point is an interesting one, and we've throughout the country we've heard lots of different ideas on that. What I understand is it's not just a matter of the government saying yes, we'll start it up again. I do understand it's owned by shareholders, and it was the shareholders who made that choice. So yeah, that's all I can add really.
Thank you. Blair?
So on transport, this is actually one of the areas where those international factors do play a big role in the inflation. So the war in Ukraine did have a big factor on the increase in petrol prices there. And we are a price taker in the international market. I'll tell you what we won't be doing. National will not be increasing the tax on fuel in our first term. And that is opposed to what Labor is planning to do, which is to hike the price of fuel by 12 cents per litre. I don't think that's fair when we're talking about petrol prices being over $3 a litre now. And that tax is an extremely regressive tax, by the way, because it will hurt a lot of people that really don't have another option except for paying for that fuel. So we won't be increasing tax on fuel. And as far as the transition to electric cars, we will be rolling out 10,000 electric charging stations across New Zealand. That is going to be huge for the South Island. I know that a lot of people, part of the reason why they aren't yet ready to switch to an electric car, or whether if they do get an electric car, why they still keep a petrol one, is because of range anxiety, being worried about getting from point A to point B without running out of electricity. I also have range anxiety frequently. In fact, on a recent trip coming up from down south from Canterbury, I had to make an emergency trip to Reefton because there was no charging point available on the way back up. So we will be rolling out that charging infrastructure across the South Island. This is a big infrastructure investment. It will benefit New Zealand, a bit like the ultra-fast broadband that we did a few years ago that really unlocked some economic growth potential. Speeding up that shift to electrifying the fleet, but also unlocking that economic growth potential with electric cars. It's something I'm very excited about.
Thank you. Jace.
So we've had 2 climate-related disasters in the Nelson region. I think the last one, the flood, is estimated to have cost us $200 million in damages and changed the way our city looks as well. These are the direct results of having burned fossil fuels, globally of course, but we've contributed enormously. We are, I think, the highest contributor per capita in the OECD for that. So let's be clear about this. If we continue down this road of exploring and thinking that we're just needing to get liquid fuels from petrochemicals, we can expect ever greater calamity, ever greater climate chaos. This is not the road we should take. And to the rescue is the great benefit of electric transportation. We have enormous opportunity in New Zealand to develop renewable electricity. And I don't know if you know this, but those buses running down the street, they're 4.5 times more efficient than a petrol-driven bus. And what they said could never be done because they would take hours to charge them. They charge to 80% in 15 minutes. All the technological problems we need to rid ourselves of bellowing greenhouse gases and exacerbating the problem of climate chaos are right in our grasp here in New Zealand. We are the most blessed to do that. Our wind energy sites have 2 times the average that the wind sites in the EU has. Our geothermal can be upgraded 2.5 times the amount of geothermal that we need. We have run-of-river possibilities. We have ample solar in Nelson. I was part of a group that has developed this plan to have a large solar array out on Bells Island. That's going to power most of Richmond, interestingly, and it will do that with 0 emissions, will not create more climate chaos. That's the route we have to take. Rethink any ideas you have about the future of fossil fuels. Thank you.
Thank you, Jace. Rachel.
Thank you. Just before I get to transport, I do just want to point out, because I've pulled up the figures around net debt as a percentage of GDP according to the IMF, just because I do value my integrity and I haven't pulled the wool over your eyes. If you look at Japan, net debt is around 160%. Italy, just over 120%. Advanced economies are around 80%. United Kingdom and United States are above that. Australia is just under 40%. New Zealand is the fourth lowest on this chart of developed countries that I have at just over 20%. So yes, we do have net debt that needs to be brought down. There's no doubt about it. But our approach to COVID, through using things like the wage subsidy, saved lives and saved jobs. And yes, we will have to pay it back, but those were the tough decisions we made at the time because they were in the interests of New Zealand for the long term. When it comes to transport, I'm really proud of my achievements here in Nelson and also of the governments to support people to make modal shift. And so we're investing in cycling and walking infrastructure. We've invested in the new bus service that we have. And through our clean car discount across New Zealand, we have seen a significant shift towards electric vehicles. We are investing in more charging stations, and one of the challenges we've got an example at St Arnaud where we need to get one in there. We've actually had some supply chain challenges around getting the infrastructure that we need for those chargers into New Zealand, so it has caused us some genuine challenge there. But we will be continuing with the clean car discount because not only does it help people make a shift to an electric vehicle, over time it's also helping us build a second-hand market for electric vehicles, which means that lower income people can purchase an electric vehicle because at the moment they're out of reach in terms of cost. What I would also say around the cost of fuel, which is where your question came from, sir, is I have a real issue around the fact that so many of us in the South Island pay more for our fuel. One of the things we've done is we've given the Commerce Commission the power to intervene, and they are actually taking a really close look at this at the moment because we pay more in the South Island and more in Nelson, and I don't think that's fair, and it's something that I'll be continuing to push so that we have the tools to change that. But what I would also encourage everyone to remember as well with the fuel levies that we do add, that's so that we can build our roads. We actually need that income, and all of that income goes directly back into transport. So yes, it does add a cost to the cost of transport, but it's so that we can continue to invest in the infrastructure that we desperately need in our region. Thank you.
Thank you. Based on the time, that brings our evening to a close. I'd like to invite you to put your hands together for our 4 candidates again, who I think have done a great job. Thank you. And thank you all for, I suppose, showing the value of manaakitanga as we respect each other, respect our candidates, and really grapple with the issues that we face here in New Zealand. So just before we go, if I may just offer a short blessing. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon you and give you peace. Kia tau, kia tatou katoa, te atawhai o te tātou riki, o ihu karaiti. Me te araha o te atua. Me te whiwhina tahitanga ki te wairua tapu. Ake, ake, ake. Amen. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all now and evermore.